Chapter 245. Of course, the number of ascendants is small after all. As the foundation of the pedigree, it's too extravagant to use them to fight against others. Moreover, it's not even certain if they can form a complete organization. Most of the legions are actually abyssal creatures. Crow explained, "Didn't you already see the longbow guards in Jinling? That's Kwafu's personal army, one of the top 3 legions in Doomsday. All of its members are born with the stigmata, longbow, a large group of abyssal creatures. The stigmata, longbow's citizens, was a third-order stigmata in the Ho-Tu lineage of the Dongsha pedigree, and the top of this path of ascension was Kwafu himself, after Kwafu broke into the abyssal ritual alone and defeated them one by one. This group of abyssal creatures pledged their loyalty to Kwafu and respected him as the master of all the longbow's citizens. Other than the 5th-order ascendants of the Dongsha pedigree, he was a genuine master of a large group in Hell and was treated with respect by all the lords of Hell and Hell. In order to prevent the large-scale actions of the legions from disrupting the order of the present realm, the Astronomy Society did not even allow undeclared legions to enter the present realm. But in the entire present realm, how many pedigrees were large enough to forcibly enclose and seal the borders of the abyss, and slowly gather abyssal creatures that were compatible with their own pedigree? Therefore, there was the circulation of the legion contract as a substitute, whether it was a promise, a transaction, or a forced suppression or enslavement. Due to various reasons, there would often be abyssal creatures that would use their own tokens as the carrier of the contract. As long as they had the legion contract, the ascendant could discuss and communicate with the tribe represented by the contract, or forcefully order and coerce, bribe, or deceive, and make the other party's tribe serve them. Some large groups of abyssal creatures even signed long-term employment contracts with the present realm's pedigree and worked as mercenaries in the abyss. According to the different contracts, the time and number of restrictions were different. This kind of legion that was incompatible with their own pedigree was even worse. In this rookie competition, the large groups of Yamatai City were suppressed by the Shinue framework. Although they handed over the contract, it would not be effective for long, and most of them would have a limit. Then what's mine? Huaishur raised the Nibelungen ring and asked. At the mention of this, Crow looked at Huaishur with a strange look of sympathy and pity. This is a long story. Originally, the army contract in Paradise was the most powerful one among the 3 contracts. Unfortunately, the main body that was connected to the contract had been quietly stabbed to death by Huaishur. Yes, those 7 princes. As long as he had the contract in Yamatai City, he would be able to get the 7 princes to help him unconditionally 3 times. If this fool had known about this beforehand, he would definitely not have accepted Little Cat's mission, right? Now, the 7 princes and their last obsession, Prince Charming, had all been killed by him. Even the spoils of war had fallen into his pocket. Even if they wanted to regret it, they had nowhere to go. It's a long story. Crow coughed twice and said, "The Nibelungen ring is actually a contract unique to the celestial genealogy, which corresponds to the advancement of the specter. Isn't this a coincidence? Just right for you." "Really?" Huaishur frowned and stared at Crow. He felt that something was wrong until Crow looked away awkwardly. "However, there is a small flaw." "I knew it was a scammer." Huaishur was furious. "What flaw? Tell me clearly." This Crow coughed for a long time and said, "As everyone knows, Paradise has fallen for a long time. Most of the armies cultivated by Utopia have been separated and left in the turmoil. Among them, cough cough, including the Spectre army. So, cough cough, your army, you may have to gather them yourself." Huaishur was dumbfounded. "In other words, I only have the title of captain now. Not only have all the soldiers in my hands run away, but I also have to go to some godforsaken place to find them?" "Yes." Crow was embarrassed. Isn't this a scammer? Huaishur was incompetent and furious. He couldn't even keep a mountain ghost alive right now, so how could he find dozens of spirits? The actual situation is not that bad. After all, the Nibelungen Ring is also one of the 4 major armies in celestial genealogy. The crow on the page comforted him. You don't need to look for it. As long as you inject your origin substance into it, it will be able to compare it to your sacred insignia and create a low-level ghost. Even though it won't be too smart, it'll be fine as a tool. Okay, my ass. Huaishur did not want to talk to her at all. You said you would give me a regiment, but when I arrived, I was the only captain. Not to mention the Italian artillery, you didn't even give me a political commissar. There's really only 1 regiment. You even have to make your own soldiers. What other benefits do you, celestial genealogy, have other than forcing people to spend money on it? In short, do your best, Huaishur. Believe in yourself. You can do it. After Crow gave him a word of encouragement, she turned around and fled back into her ink bottle. No matter how Huaishur urged her, she did not come out. In the silence, the taxi stopped by the side of the road. Guests were here. In the back seat, Yuan Zhao, who was hugging a manure fork to sleep, was still sleeping. He did not know what he was dreaming of, but his snot bubbles were blowing out. Get off, we're here. Huaishur took out the sword of virtue and poked him twice, then got up and got off the car. After days of fighting, it seemed that there was not even a shadow in the vicinity of Ueno Park. It was quiet. In fact, the entire city was very quiet now. Only the occasional roar of gunfire flew into the sky in the distance. Immediately, it returned to silence. Everyone was like a hunter, tiptoeing through the jungle of the city, looking for any trace of prey. In Ueno Park, it was a mess. After several battles, there was no trace of anyone. Only countless crow on the branches screamed, rising and falling like clouds. Hearing the sound of the car door opening, they turned around and stared at the 2 uninvited guests under the gloomy sky. Being stared at by countless pairs of scarlet eyes, Yuan Zhao subconsciously shuddered. As long as you don't stupidly attack them, they won't attack you. At best, it's just... Before Huaishur finished his words, a pile of bird poop fell from the sky and landed on Yuan Zhao's carefully groomed hair. Looking at the teenager's twitching face, Huaishur nodded. At best, it's just like that. I have to hold it in. I can't be angry. I can't be angry. After comparing the ratio of tens of thousands to 1, Yuan Zhao's hand holding the manure fork trembled slightly. He gritted his teeth and found a hose to wash the bird poop off his head. Huaishur, on the other hand, had already started to work. Although it was called work, it was just a stroll. Huaishur, with his hands in his pockets, strolled leisurely in the large park. He turned around and pointed out the surrounding situation to Yuan Zhao. Originally, there were quite a few art galleries and museums here, but after yesterday's short work, they were closed again today. After completing their mission, the ascendants had already left. What was left was a mess. There were cracks, deep pits, and traces of fire everywhere. Huaishur walked very carefully. He purposely walked between the burned plants and broken branches. Yuan Zhao followed behind. He was constantly tripped by the messy things under his feet. Then his pants would be hooked by the shrubs, or he would just stagger and almost fall into the pits. He raised his head to look at the pretty boy, but he seemed to be walking casually. Soon, he noticed that the layer of grass beneath Huaishur's feet was growing a little green, and there were new buds growing on the broken stubble of the scorch plants. Huaishur took a step. It was as if countless plants were moving with him. When Yuan Zhao frowned and closed his eyes, he heard the sound of the wind in front of him. It seemed to be integrated into a rhythm, the swaying of the branches and leaves, the undulating of countless green grass, and the fine sound of the wind blowing through the branches. Everything seemed to be intertwined with the rhythm of Weischer's footsteps, connecting with one another. "What are you doing?" He suddenly realized. "This is your sacred mark." "Yes, Mountain Ghost." Weischer admitted generously. "I need this green space to help me replenish some of my vitality. At the same time, it's also doing some work to balance out the operation. That's my repayment, right? Mountain Ghost, isn't that a girl?" TSK, as expected of a sissy. Yuan Zhao cursed silently, looking at the way he touched here and there, taking a little bit of each plant. Yuan Zhao was anxious to death because of that neither dry nor brittle look. "Can't you take a little more at once?" "Yes, but it's not necessary." Weischer walked in front and said without looking back, "I only understood this last night. For plants, human morality doesn't apply. What humans think is completely different from what they need. I can find an old tree and suck it hard to make up for my needs. But for Mountain Ghost's sacred mark, the abundance of vitality is secondary. What's more important is the cycle." Weischer raised her hand, and a grass seed flew out from her hand and landed on Yuan Zhao's hair. Very quickly, a green dog-tail flower grew out of it. Yuan Zhao impatiently pulled out the roots entangled in his hair and threw them into the soil. He followed behind him. "Can't you be more straightforward? To put it simply, it's the flow of life. Let the vitality of a whole big system run smoothly and form a healthy cycle. This is what Mountain Ghost's sacred mark needs to do." For example, Weischer reached out and pulled out a wisp of vitality from the overly thick old vines on the withered tree. He turned around and put it into a burnt trunk next to him. As he walked, he guided this wisp of vitality to spread out from the ground and finally integrated it into the overturned shrubs and grass on the ground, pulling strings to build bridges. Chapter 246. As he walked back and forth in a seemingly meaningless manner, Weischer mended the damaged cycle step by step. First, he cut off the necrotic parts from the underground roots, disregarding them. Then, he straightened out the tangled mess of roots and connected them together. He used himself as a transfer point to wander through this complicated network. Even though it was like a swimming pool problem with one faucet releasing water and one sewer releasing water, during this entire process, the system that had originally suffered setbacks was gradually reorganized, and its vitality began to flow. In the end, the countless cold-eyed crows retracted their gazes, treating the two of them as if they didn't exist. It was as if they had acknowledged their existence. Just how good was this gigolo at brushing up favorability points? Even the crows were taken care of so quickly. Yuan Zhao curled his lips. The way of the heavens is to take from those in excess and make up for those in deficiency. Why don't you just say so? Weischer turned around in shock, looking at him with an astonished expression that said, "Hey, you've actually studied before." Yuan Zhao was so angry that his face turned red. For better or for worse, I was able to get straight into Jisha's junior class. Did you think that I could only rely on playing the piano to get into university, like you? So you're a straight-A student. Sorry for the disrespect. Weischer cupped her hands in greeting. Her gaze was filled with pity, as if she was asking, "Why is your mental age lower than me, a high school student, when you're already in university?" Which made Yuan Zhao angry. Weischer continued to walk forward. As he continued to extract the vitality of different plants, the origin substance in his body began to slowly change. Under the influence of the different plants' vitality, he feel the benefits it lost of its original purity and became part of this huge vitality under the control of the mountain ghost's large amount of vitality also the mountain ghost's in and out of his body appeared to be filled with vitality, allowing him to intercept the flow. It was like a seed that had, as long as it did not affect the cycle of the system, All the plants in the entire Wenno Park were constantly injecting vitality into his guess had been correct. It was good to be a dog with authority. He didn't need the injection of a large amount of vitality as the Een soul. The ghost in the ring began to transform as much variety as he could get. The speed of completion was gratifying. According to this trend, was like a botanical there was no garden. Need. What it wanted was for 100 flowers to bloom, and he just needed to find a botanical garden and wait. Unfortunately, although there were many to create the ghost stigmata, there was not enough. Although the number of ghosts was limited only he had more time for himself, he could follow the map given by Kitten. Fortunately, and go there was no need to look garden outside of Yamatai that was known as Kenzaki. As long as presumably there would be more types of stigmata there. Other since the variety was continuously flow to him. He would focus on quality after a long time. At this moment, began to become stigmata. Huaisher how much longer to reconstruct the system's about cycle? 2 days. Huaisher answered. However, the premise of 2 days was that Huaisher intended to advance here. But advancing here was obviously not cost-effective. There was not enough ghosts. Even if the mountain ghost stigmata was innately weak, it would be difficult for it to be of great use even if it advanced. It was better to endure it first, but if he wanted to create the first ghost in his independent regiment, it should only take half an hour, right? Huaisher estimated the time in his mind, but suddenly Yuan Zhao turned back abruptly and raised the trident in his hand. With a burst of whistling sound, a blade of air flew out and directly pierced into the low bushes behind him. For a moment, there was a continuous crackling sound, and the grass and leaves were scattered. Then, Huaisher heard the sound of small footsteps in the distance and frowned. Yuan Zhao was faster than he noticed it. This younger brother was something. When the loose bushes stopped shaking, there was a small whimper from inside. A yellow Shiba Inu cautiously poked its head out and looked in the direction of Yuan Zhao. Is it a dog? He breathed a sigh of relief, bent down, and waved at the puppy with a smile. Oh, this little thing is so cute. Come here and let me have a look. Are you a fool? Huaisher shook his head and sighed. He directly lifted the puppy's collar and turned around to run. Just behind them, the Shiba Inu that was approaching them with small steps suddenly sped up. It was as fast as a yellow lightning jumping into the air. Then Yuan Zhao saw the thin Shiba Inu in the air suddenly expand. It was like an inflated balloon. It exploded. Countless pieces of flesh and blood flew in the air, turning into a dark rotten color in the air, splashing in all directions. Wherever the blood rain passed, the ground was scorched black. The fierce poison was spreading rapidly, and even the soil on the ground was sizzling. Being blown by the stinky wind, Yuan Zhao only felt a burst of instinctive irritation and dizziness. Then he was thrown to the ground by Huaisher. Huaisher took out the sword of virtue, cut his hand directly, and threw 2 drops of blood into Yuan Zhao's mouth. There was no time to make an antidote, so it was better to fight poison with poison. What are you doing? Yuan Zhao accidentally swallowed a drop of Huaisher's blood. His face turned green, but soon he felt that as the smell of rust spread, his dim eyes gradually lit up. For a moment, his face changed, but he didn't blame Huaisher for being ungrateful. He could only secretly pray that this toy boy didn't have any infectious disease. Soon, he realized and turned pale with fright. The dog exploded. I saw it. Huaisher took off the shotgun expressionlessly, loaded it with bullets, and looked around in the countless screams that startled the crows. Finally, he suddenly turned the muzzle, aimed behind him, and pulled the trigger. Boom! A loud noise burst out. A translucent figure was hit out of the void. There was a scream, and blood splattered everywhere. But then, the figure disappeared without a trace, as if it was invisible. What the hell? At this point, Yuan Zhao understood that it was an enemy attack. He pulled out his gun and stabbed around randomly, but the person who came was obviously proficient in stealth techniques. At this moment, Yuan Zhao couldn't stab anything at all. Now that the other party stopped looking down on them and really sneaked into the darkness, even Huaisha couldn't find him by relying on the crow's vision. Let's go first. Huaisha reached into his waist bag, grabbed a piece of iron, and smelted it in his hand. The alchemy fire flashed, and after a short 2 seconds, it left his hand. With a glaring flash, a smoke bomb suddenly exploded around them, and the gray fog swallowed everything. Huaisha grabbed Yuan Zhao's collar and ran forward. Then, he heard a shrill scream coming from the sky. From a tall building in the distance, a squatting figure listened to the instructions in the earpiece and picked out an arrow from the quiver beside him. Finally, he pulled out a slender arrow with an iron-gray tail, put it on a huge iron bow, and pointed it at the sky. The bowstring was pulled, and a teeth-numbing sound burst out. With the release of the finger, the shrill scream rushed into the sky. A bit of iron light disappeared into the clouds, but as the iron light dissipated, soon 1, 2, 10, 100 iron lights lit up from the gray-black clouds like a rainstorm and fell to the ground. The area covered by the smoke was covered in it. The rainstorm of arrows fell from the sky in an instant. "Let go of me." Yuan Zhao struggled, breaking free from Huaisha's hands. He flipped in the air and pulled out a slender iron chain from his arms and directly fastened it to the front of the trident. Then, the spear pierced the air. In an instant, the spear shaft shook, and the iron chain fastened on the spear whipped the air like a long whip, bursting out a low, whistling sound. Under the swinging and whipping of the slender iron chain, the arrows that fell like meteors were all blocked by the spear blade and flew to other places. This unique skill made Huaisha's eyes pop out of their sockets. Elder Luo had only taught him how to use a simple long weapon, but this move clearly belonged to the sect's secret inheritance and was a technique that had been figured out by predecessors. It wasn't something that could be learned in a hurry. If it weren't for the fact that this place wasn't suitable, Huaisha would have grabbed Yuan Zhao and wasted some of his wool first. Jealous, right? Yuan Zhao glanced at Huaisha's astonished expression from the corner of his eyes and raised his eyebrows proudly. "Can you learn our Yuan family's secret inheritance?" "Fine. I'll let this brat be proud for a while." But as the two of them ran, they saw a sublime with a large shield descend from the sky, and in his hand, he suddenly smashed a heavy stake into the ground. Amidst the rumbling sound, 2 rays of light suddenly flew out from where the iron stake landed and pulled on Huaisha and Yuan Zhao's bodies. Immediately afterwards, their bodies trembled, and they felt as if they had become much heavier. The further they went, the more difficult it was for them to move. This was obviously a tool under the Heart's Delight framework. Even though they didn't know how it worked, once they were illuminated by the iron stake's light, they wouldn't even be able to run away. Tisk! Huaisha stopped in his tracks when he sensed the origin substance fluctuations in the distance. He turned around and looked behind him. In the dense forest behind him, 10 or so silhouettes slowly appeared under the faint light. Fortunately, I contacted the other team, or you really would have gotten away. The leader of the Sublime wore a demonic mask and held a gun in his hand. His gaze was cold as he swept his gaze over Huaisha and Yuan Zhao, who was beside him. He suddenly said, "Hey, brat, we're only looking for trouble with Huaisha. If you leave now, we won't kill you." "I knew you'd cause trouble." Yuan Zhao immediately glared at him. "How many people have you offended? Why are there so many people looking for trouble with you?" Huaisha thought carefully for a long time, then helplessly shrugged. "There really are quite a few. I could count at first, but I can't keep track of them anymore. This time, I've really gotten into trouble because of you." Yuan Zhao grumbled irritably. He raised his hand, took off the chain on the blade of his gun, and stuffed it into his clothes. He raised his eyes and looked in front of him. Hey, you know we're from the Social Security Bureau, and you still dare to attack us. How fresh. Do you think that revealing your identity will determine your ranking? Then, what's the point of the rookie competition? On the other side, the blade-wielding Sublime slowly walked over. I'll give you 5 seconds. Hurry up and scram. Don't cause trouble for yourself. Do you think I'll scram just because you say so? Do you think I don't care about my face? Yuan Zhao sneered. He turned around and pointed the blade of his gun at the person's face. Today, I'll teach you a lesson. If you all come up one by one and help me die, I won't say anything. Consider it my lack of skill. We'll meet again at the border in the future. But if you all want to come at me together, let me remind you first. My cousin is the director of the Jinling Social Security Bureau. My cousin's surname is Zhu, and her name is Zhu Qingyu. She's currently the second son of the White Emperor of Dongxia. My great-grandfather is the head of the cabinet and the military minister of the southwest border. My mother's surname is Li. She's the Li from Beijing's Li family. Yuan Zhao disdainfully spat on the ground as he stared at the stunned expressions of the Sublime. He then hooked his finger at them. This young master is going to King interfere in today's matter. If you have the guts, then come at me together. If I take a step back, my surname isn't Yuan. Chapter 247. Yuan Zhao, 14 years old, student Jixia Junior Class. Sublimator, little brother, official's son, dung inserter, and so on. Unfathomable. Hiss, Huaisher sucked in a breath of cold air. He didn't expect Yuan Zhao's background to be so frightening. Moreover, he had such a frightening background and dung inserter. He suddenly felt even more respect and admiration. So frightening, this kid definitely can't cough. Do you see? Huaisher suddenly reached out and slapped Yuan Zhao's back. He shouted at the group of people, "This is my big brother, Jinling's Social Security's silver gun, little overlord. If you have the guts, then come at me together. A bunch of trash. You don't even deserve to carry my big brother's shoes. My big brother can fight 10 people like you." In the silence, Yuan Zhao turned to look at him bitterly, implying, "How can you be so shameless?" Huaisher gave him an approving look that said, "Big brother is right, big brother is right." What a joke! How refreshing! If I had any shame, I would have been poor a long time ago. How could I survive until now? The expressions of Huaisher and the other two groups of people were even more complicated. The group of sublimators who had just arrived looked at Yuan Zhao in astonishment. Finally, they looked at the group of invisible contestants in front of them with resentment. The expression in their eyes roughly meant, "WDNMD, you bastard wants to harm me." King said, "It's just an sublimator. Why did you bastard Guo Chang have to come and drag us in? You even gave us half of the loot. In the end, you were waiting for me here." Thinking of this, the expressions of the attackers in the back became more and more angry. This bastard is too inhumane. It's fine to deal with a rootless Astronomy Association member. After all, it's a rookie competition. Everyone can just kill him and go back to their own village. The Astronomy Association can't just kill me because of a competition result, right? But killing an nth generation of the Dongxia Empire was an entirely different matter. Who knows if this little bastard will arrange for my whole family to be killed because I glared at him. I treat you as a good brother, but you treat me like this. Guo Chang's expression kept changing. Even though he was wearing a mask, his eyes were still filled with grief and indignation. I didn't know. It had to be said that Yuan Zhao's identity was indeed too exaggerated. The other side was still testing the waters with a 4v4, but this kid threw out a king bomb. The other side was so confused that they didn't dare to make a move. They were all mercenaries at the border. What was the point of risking their lives? Wasn't it all for money? It was one thing to kill someone and steal their belongings normally, but to kill the heir of a large family in the Eastern Summer Country in a game that was being broadcasted live all over the world. Damn, you might as well jump to the new treasure island in front of the White Emperor. For a moment, everyone looked at each other. Under Yuan Zhao's awe-inspiring rebuke, no one dared to take a step forward. Then a blurry and slender figure appeared behind the invisible barrier. A pair of familiar eyes stared coldly at the young man in front of her. Yuan Zhao, you're so awesome. You're even throwing your prestige at our Lin family. Lin Yu? Yuan Zhao stared blankly for a moment, then immediately became angry. Your Lin family is really used to being overbearing. You brought people to kill me. Do you expect me to stretch out my neck and let you kill me? On the side, Huaishir asked in a low voice, You know him? Yuan Zhao clicked his tongue and lowered his voice. The Lin family is famous for having a female psychopath. She has an unreasonable brother and a shrewish mother. Everyone avoids them. How did you offend him? I don't know. I didn't see him. Wait a minute. I remember now. Out of habit, Huaishir tried to shirk her responsibility. However, she took out the Book of Destiny and searched through it. Suddenly, she found traces of that pair of venomous eyes in the corner of her memory. A thought flashed in his mind, and he pointed at Lin Yu. You're that old Annie who made the witches stew at the cooking demon tournament. Lin Yu stared blankly for a moment, and then the viciousness in her eyes became more and more intense. Then she heard Huaishir sigh helplessly. It's been so long, your skincare is no good. How many days have you not hydrated? It's so swollen. Crack. In the silence, everyone heard the sound of teeth being gritted. The best way to offend a woman was to first call her old, second call her ugly, and third call her fat. Huaishir casually did all three. Seeing this pretty boy who had once taken away her advancement materials so arrogantly, Lin Yu's face turned green with anger. Huaishir quickly took a step back and hid behind Yuan Zhao, asking in a low voice, Can you handle it? Yuan Zhao rolled his eyes. If I had nothing better to do, why would I go against a crazy woman? She doesn't care about her life when she goes crazy. Then forget it. Huaishir sighed. Why don't I think of a way myself? At this time, Lin Yu's angry voice came from the front. I'll say it one last time. Yuan Zhao, get out of my way. Don't get in my way. Yuan Zhao raised his head and opened his mouth. He felt a hurricane burst out from behind him. In the blink of an eye, it was as if a dozen wind cannons burst out in an instant. In the low roar, 2 steps, the storm surged buzzed forward with a roar, chasing after the shadow that suddenly burst out. In the overlapping roar, with one step, withered branches trembled, and withered leaves swept in all directions. Huaishir's speed had soared to the limit in the blink of an eye. You step, you step, you step. Triple you step. 20 meters. The safe distance that the attacker deliberately left behind was crossed by Huaishir before he took a step. In the blink of an eye, Huaishir's cold face was reflected in Lin Yu's eyes. He raised his hand and held the sacrificial knife tightly. Slash! Bang! The invisible shield shattered with a bang. On Lin Yu's waist, a doll-like pendant was silently cut down from the top of her head, tragically split into 2. Before she could scream, the sacrificial knife that Huaishir slashed down suddenly disappeared, replaced by a heavy axe that swept across. Beheading! Blood flashed. A terrified scream finally drilled out of her throat. Lin Yu was pulled and staggered back. A deep cut was left on her face by the axe, and right in front of her, an arm fell off from her shoulder, spraying blood in the air. After blocking the first blow with the prop he carried with him, Chief Guoyu, who had been protecting Lin Yu, finally reacted. In a hurry, he made the best response. One hand pulled her back to avoid the attack, while the other arm blocked in front of the axe. He managed to buy a brief moment of time, and in an instant, Huaishir had already retreated and widened the distance between them. The teenager held the blood-stained axe in his hand and stared at Lin Yu's neck. He could not help but sigh. He finally understood the helplessness of not being able to cut off the head when it was right in front of his eyes. Why can't I cut off her head? Lin Yu trembled, and her face was pale. She felt the sharp pain on her face and reached out to touch the wound. Her frightened expression twitched, becoming ferocious and crazy. "Kill them! Kill them!" She screamed crazily and ordered, "Just do it. The Lin family will take responsibility if anything happens." Who is a wild girl from the second branch trying to scare by using the Lin family's name. Just as all the mercenaries were about to move, Yuan Zhao suddenly took a step forward and threatened, "If you want to talk tough, ask your elder brother to do it. You can't represent the Lin family. Small fries. Think carefully before you make a move. Don't let people betray you without knowing. I am the eldest son of the Yuan family." This proclamation of the spoiled brat was powerful and effective. It brought about a moment of hesitation. The expressions of the two groups of mercenaries changed. The feeling of being caught in the middle of a fight between gods was really unbearable, but after a moment, they suddenly heard a loud noise. Yuan Zhao instantly moved his gun, and a bullet in front of his trident was split in half. Someone fired. In an instant, the leader with the broken arm turned around in shock and saw his teammate behind him holding a gun. His ally's expression changed instantly. He looked over as if asking, "Damn, why did you find such an idiot?" "How fresh! If I knew that he was an idiot, why would I still look for him?" "Uncle Gua, hurry up and do it," the young man urged loudly. "We have so many people, can't we take down the two of them?" King retard. Gua Chang cursed in his heart. "Don't you know who you are just because that woman from the Lin family threw a few flirtatious glances at you? Trash who can't move when he sees a woman. Do you really think she would like a stinking brat like you?" Immediately, he noticed Lin Yu's vicious gaze. "You can't offend the Yuan family, but you can offend the Lin family, right?" Guo Chang's expression under his mask suddenly became bitter. He raised his gun, aimed at Yuan Zhao's face, and pulled the trigger. No matter what, the mission was more important. Since he had already offended him, he might as well go all the way. Then Yuan Zhao disappeared from where he was. The sound of galloping iron hooves burst out from the air. A fishy wind blew, and the trident was already rushing over with the sound of wind. Although he was a little stupid, Yuan Zhao was still an external member of the Social Security Bureau who had been led by Big Cousin for so long. Even if he was stupid, he could still distinguish the situation. The moment Lin Yu appeared, he knew that today's matter wouldn't be settled peacefully. Since Huaishir had chosen to make a move, how could he just stand there and watch? The moment he heard the gunshot, he cut off the bullet and rushed forward. The Pegasus divine mark drove the hurricane and became one with the spear. His speed was unbelievably fast. No matter how chinibi he was, being able to stay in the action department of the Social Security Bureau for so long, young Master Yuan still had some skills in his hands. 10 meters away, the hurricane seemed to have condensed into a solid form. As the tip of the spear rushed forward, it stunned people in place and made it difficult to breathe. From being still to running at full speed, the terrifying acceleration brought by the Pegasus divine mark made him gallop like lightning. The horse was as fast as lightning, and the bow was like a thunderbolt. When the mournful cry rang out, Yuan Zhao had already passed by the sublimator who had just fired the shot. A streak of blood spurted out from the trident. Behind him, the The sublimator who had fired the shot had already fallen on his back. His face had been pierced by the tip of the spear, and there was a large hole in his face. Before he could even show his ambition to be a hero saving a beauty, he had already turned into a hateful little Judge Jean and left the scene. "What are you still standing there for, Shi Jiang?" Guo Chang angrily shouted at the group of sublimators behind him. "Could it be that the Lin family invited you here to watch a show? Mother of Asterisk-Cur, you clearly came to ask me for help, and now you're using the Lin family's name to suppress me." Sensing Lin Yu's cold gaze, Shi Jiang didn't know how many tricks Guo Chang played in his mind, but he still angrily shouted and rushed in the direction of Huai Shi and Yuan Zhao with his sword in hand. Then he saw Guo Chang waved his hand, and everyone instantly turned invisible. F***CK. A figure suddenly jumped out of the smoke, carrying something the size of a thermos bottle on his shoulder. He leaped into the air, turned around in the air, and threw the heavy thermos bottle in the direction of the iron pillar. While invisible, a sublime subconsciously raised his sniper rifle, wanting to pull the trigger. Immediately, he heard Guo Chang's frantic order. "Don't shoot." It was too late. Huai Shi turned around in the air. The shotgun was already closed. He aimed at the falling iron bottle and pulled the trigger. With a loud bang, Huai Shi's arm shook. Countless scarlet bullets flew out from the barrel of the gun. In the blink of an eye, the thin tin bottle was torn to pieces. The liquid with a metallic glow rippled and spread in the air, splashing onto the ground like rain. Immediately, it was ignited by the fiery power of the steel balls. Scarlet flames erupted. With a low rumble, a thick wave of air suddenly spread out. The burning rain of fire roared, and thousands of sticky flames fell from the sky. It enveloped the sublime guards in front of the iron pillar. This was the alchemy product that Huaishur had used most of his origin substance to forge the liquid metal combustion bomb. Ramses' wrath. The pharaoh's fury was like a rain of fire, instantly bringing with it a temperature of over 1,000 degrees Celsius, splashing onto every stunned face. Like maggots in the bones, the flames drilled into the depths of blood and bones, burning through everything, bringing about wails and pain. Miserable screams suddenly erupted. Huaishur ignored the attacks of the silhouettes that suddenly appeared in the air. He landed on the ground, stepped forward, and charged forward with Yu's step. He met the figure at the very front head-on and moved forward. Boom! In the fierce collision, Huaishur's 5 fingers tightened the blade in the hands of the Sublime Guard, cutting through the layer of iron that had been hastily condensed. Blood dripped, and he couldn't help but take a step back. Then he saw Huaishur suddenly leap up and stomp on his face. The power of the Emperor Yu's steps exploded out once again, bringing with it the pain of tearing flesh. Huaishur's unparalleled speed crushed his face. The crisp sound of a neck breaking rang out, and Huaishur had already flown towards the area covered by the rain of fire. He stepped on a burning body, and in the process of falling down, he aimed the shotgun at the burning head and pulled the trigger. Blood splattered. After the loud bang, Huaishur had already landed on the ground. He moved forward, ignoring the Sublime who were enduring the pain and attacking him from all sides, and chopped down at the iron pillar with his axe. The loud sound of something tearing through the air rang out again. A silver arrow fell from the sky, moving as fast as a ghost. Huaishur hastily dodged, and it pierced through his collarbone, tearing open a huge hole. The axe blade powerlessly left a shallow cut on the iron pole. Immediately after, the Sublime who was in charge of the iron pillar placed his burning hands on the iron pillar, and the light once again connected to Huaishur and Yuan Zhao's bodies. Gravity doubled. The two of them stopped in their tracks. The sound of a sword and a blade piercing through the air rang out behind them. A poisonous sword of nothingness slashed down at Huaishur's back. Huaishur expressionlessly raised his hand and threw the silver ball that was as big as an iron ball at the Sublime behind the iron pillar, allowing the poisonous sword to pass through his body. Wherever the blade passed, flesh and blood were torn apart, and an extremely thin cut appeared. It was clearly a sword of nothingness, but it brought intense pain and damage to his internal organs and stigmata. He suddenly took a step to the left, shrinking his body and hiding behind the side of the Sublime beside him. Immediately after, there was a loud bang, and the alchemy bomb that Huaishur had thrown out had already exploded. At a very close distance, countless iron shards whistled through the air, instantly turning the Sublime, who was in charge of the relic, into a corpse riddled with holes. And Huaishur, who was relying on his human shield to block the explosion, still felt his vision go black. The power of a grenade exploding at close range was not a breeze. In that moment of trance, he instinctively turned around and swung the axe in his hand horizontally, slashing at the Sublime, who had just ambushed him. Under the attack of the iron shards, the Sublime who was holding the nothingness poison sword could not help but scream, subconsciously covering his face. Then he felt a chill in his lower body. He was cut in half. Frantically extracting the power of the Vitality Network in Weno Park, Huaishur smeared a handful of silver blood potion on his back and forcibly maintained his combat state, ignoring the fact that his internal organs were already turning white. He raised his head and looked at the Sublime, who was shooting arrows on a tall building in the distance. He suddenly raised his hand and took a step forward. From his raised palm, a brilliant light appeared, and the pike of compassion wrapped in chains followed Huaishur's roar, stepped forward, and swung his hand, breaking through the air like a javelin towards the tall building hundreds of meters away. On the tall building, the bow-wielding Sublime was stunned at first, subconsciously wanting to dodge, but then he could not help but sneer. It was off. It was completely off target. Even if he did not care, the javelin would only land a few dozen meters away from him. Then he instantly drew his bow and pulled out an arrow that was as pale as a skeleton, ready to seize the opportunity to give Huaishur a vicious blow. But then he saw a chain suddenly fly out from the javelin that broke through the air, and suddenly it was tied around his neck. What the hell? The impact of the origin substance spread out, and his brain stopped for a moment. Then, as the chain contracted, the javelin that had deviated from its original trajectory corrected itself, and with a loud bang, it stabbed into his head. Bang! He fell backwards, and Judge Jean landed on the ground. As for Huaishur, he had already thrown his axe and blade at the surrounding silhouettes, and used the virtuous sword to block the crossbow arrow behind him, finding a brief gap in the encirclement. He raised his fist towards the iron pillar in front of him. Clench, accumulate power, and then infuse origin substance. The mountain ghost's flames were compressed between his fingers, and as he clenched his fist, it burst forth with a thunderous roar. This was a strike that required all of his concentration. Drummer! Boom! With a loud bang, Huaishur's finger bones broke inch by inch, and his left forearm was cleanly fractured. The cracks on the iron pillar, under the intense vibrations, had already grown as if they were alive, spreading out and covering his entire body in an instant. Finally, it shattered with a loud bang. The rays of light binding the two of them were no longer there. The Pegasus instantly relaxed, ignoring the Breath River's entanglement. Yuan Zhao had taken a spear head-on, and he madly charged forward, pulling on Huaishur's collar. The sound of iron hooves galloping could be heard as they charged into the depths of the forest. They're going to run. Guo Chan's eyes widened. He wanted to chase after them, but he heard a cold laugh from beside him. Run! Lin Yu played with the little person in his hand. They won't be able to run. Bang! With a crisp sound, the little person's calf suddenly broke. Yuan Zhao staggered as he madly ran, and a deep wound appeared on his calf, revealing bone. The cracks on his bones began to spread. He staggered and rolled to the ground. Huaishur crawled up from the ground, glancing at Yuan Zhao on the ground, then turned around to look at the group of people from the Breath River who were chasing after them. More than 10 well-trained ascended cultivators. It was obvious that they were no match for them. He sighed and lowered his head to apologize to Yuan Zhao. Thank you for saving me just now, but I'm sorry. You shouldn't have gotten involved in this matter. He propped himself up with the help of a tree trunk. In a few breaths, he forcefully extracted his vitality and healed his wound. However, his broken arm was still not healed, but it was enough for him to escape. Yuan Zhao rolled his eyes and glared at him. He wanted to scold him, but he didn't say anything. His heart turned cold. Damn it, I'll just treat it as returning the favor to this pretty boy. Consider your young master blind. In his anger, he closed his eyes and waited for death. When he was placed on the ground, everyone couldn't help but take a few steps back. Some of the 4 or 5 ascendants who entered the forest first already had faint acne marks on their faces, but under the suppression of their sacred marks and physiques, they only coughed and didn't lose the ability to move like the 2 unlucky fellows. The surveillance footage shows that he didn't escape. Shi Jiang lowered his head and looked at the small screen in his hand. He then raised his head and glanced at Guochang. You took the job, and you gave the idea. What should we do? If you continue to use us as cannon fodder, I won't dare to take your things anymore. Let's turn around and leave. Guochang frowned as he stared at the Shi River. Shi Jiang also looked at him coldly. After losing so many people and not even getting a single drop of soup, he had already reached the limit of his tolerance. Logically speaking, since the mission had already failed and they weren't iron-willed warriors, they shouldn't spread love, freedom, and peace. The mercenaries should be like hyenas, immediately leaving when they couldn't get any benefits. However, Guo Chang was now stuck in a dilemma. He turned around and glanced at Lin Yu behind him. Lin Yu didn't say a word, only turning around to look at him indifferently. Ever since Wai Shi escaped into the forest, she took out a small crucible and began to brew some unknown potion. All kinds of horrifying things were constantly thrown in, and soon the sound of a baby crying could be heard from inside. He guessed that she wasn't brewing anything good. If he left here, the relationship with the Lin family that he had worked so hard to build would definitely be ruined. Not only would his plan to retire with a clean slate completely fail, this crazy woman might even take her anger out on him. Thinking of the Lin family's tyrannical style in the past, he sighed and realized that he had no way out. He was still too anxious. He was used to being a wild dog, so when he saw an olive branch falling down, he couldn't wait to bite it. When he realized that the situation wasn't right, he wanted to get off the boat, but it was no longer up to him. Just as Guo Chang was thinking about the attack plan, someone suddenly suggested from behind, "That guy's stigmata is a plant type, so he has the advantage inside. Why don't we set fire to the forest and just burn that guy to death inside?" Before the voice fell, Guo Chang and Shi Jiang turned around at the same time. They looked at him as if he was an idiot. Shi Jiang turned back to look at Guo Chang, his eyes filled with doubt. "Are all of you such geniuses in your group? Where did you pick them up from?" Guo Chang's expression twitched, but he didn't speak. If it weren't for the fact that too many old brothers had died, and the quality of the newcomers was uneven, why would he want to quit the mercenary profession? A head rolled in the withered leaves, and as the corpse fell to the ground, it stopped moving and quietly dissipated. All that was left was a dirty Judge Jean among the withered leaves. Shi Jiang was not angry, but happy instead. The lion's face emitted a blazing light, and its mane moved like lightning. The resentment of a grievance, the anger that had condensed into a substance spread out in all directions like ripples. Everywhere it passed, everything was dyed blood red. This face of a Yazi was a rare binding relic found in a lost border with Mu An's gift of the Xieji. As if they had moved in a hurry, the underwater city that looked like a dragon palace was littered with many secret treasures of dragons. It was unknown how much wealth was hidden. It was a pity that not many people could come out alive. The function of this Yazi mask was very simple. As long as a teammate died, it would trigger the curse of the Yazi's resentment, directly indicating the location of the opponent and casting a curse on the soul. Under the remnant anger of the Yazi, the souls of all the ascendants were like candles in the wind. They might die on the spot without even needing to look for them. In an instant, the red light was like an arrow, and the Yazi's resentment locked onto its target. The curse fell from the sky, and a faint shadow fell out of the darkness in the corner, almost as if it was about to dissipate. Found it? At that moment, the pleasantly surprised Shi Jiang heard the sound of a trigger being pulled behind him. Subconsciously, he crawled on the ground. Then, he rejoiced from the bottom of his heart, because in the void in front of him, a hidden ascendant was suddenly ejected and fell to the ground full of holes. It turned into a Judge Jean, and Wai Shi, who had succeeded in an instant, waved his hand, and the ghost and sacrificial knife that he had released as bait returned to his hand. He took a step back, hid in the darkness, and melted again. Then, as Shi Jiang turned around and roared, a solid sound wave was released from the mouth of the Yazi, instantly piercing through the dense forest, chiseling a large hole in the ancient trees, and finally disappearing at the end of the line of sight. Countless trees swayed and fell, and dust flew up amidst the rumbling sound. But not a single shadow could be seen from inside. Huaishur disappeared again. He left. The surrounding ascendants were on guard, and two pairs of burning eyes swept in all directions. All the darkness in the eyes had nowhere to hide, but they couldn't see that fleeting shadow. Someone hurriedly walked over to help Shijiang up, but Shijiang angrily slapped his hand away. Am I an old lady who scams for money? Do I need people to help me? Then he felt that this person's appearance seemed to be wrong. Pa! As Shijiang slapped his hand, that person's figure suddenly blurred, and the face that had clearly left flickered, turning into Huaishur's face. The Book of Destiny slammed down again, and the red gloves records covered the ghost's shattered consciousness. As long as the divine mark was intact and the origin substance hadn't been completely scattered, the ghost could continue to move. It was much more convenient than a body of flesh and blood. As the ghost's origin substance was replenished, Huaishur's face became even paler. This kind of emptiness that came from his soul was something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Even though his body's vitality could be replenished, there was a limit to the amount of origin substance he could accumulate. Needless to say, he had already experienced a great battle and didn't have much left. His blue bar was almost empty. He wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. Huaishur squinted his eyes and silently counted the number of footsteps off in the distance. However, a chill suddenly appeared in his consciousness, causing him to leap backwards. Immediately afterwards, he saw the ground in front of him cave in. A tall and sturdy figure suddenly appeared, stomping on the spot where his head had been. The ground trembled. Then, the figure closed in on him, step by step. It was as if it could see where he was. Guochang. Huaishur was stunned. The figure was already charging towards him. One of its broken arms was raised, while the other was like an iron rod, thrusting forward as it howled through the air. Huaishur hurriedly summoned his axe to block in front of him, but he couldn't help but fly backwards. As he flew through the air, he felt that something wasn't right. A portion of his origin substance seemed to be missing, and rust appeared on the back of his axe. Before he could react, an iron fork appeared in Guochang's hand and stabbed towards Huaishur's neck. Metal clanged against metal. Huaishur tried to block it, but sparks flew everywhere. He felt his vision darken once again. Another portion of his origin substance had been extracted. Then Huaishur realized Guochang was actually trying to eat his origin substance. Two blurry horns slowly appeared on both sides of Guochang's knitted hat. An illusory figure that looked like a bull's head slowly rose from behind him, gulping down the negative origin substance in the air. Its pitch-black eyes stared intently at Huaishur's location. Step by step, it closed in. Bull's head? No, it was Fang Liang, the legendary demonic god who could devour ghosts and monsters. He was completely focused on negative origin substances. Allowing Huaishur to exhaust Breath River's troops was also using Breath River's troops to exhaust Huaishur's stamina. After enduring for a long time, it suddenly attacked, forcing Su Chun into a desperate situation. Behind Huaishur, the ascendants who had been hiding for a long time appeared and surrounded him. Chapter 251. In the blink of an eye, the tip of the spear thrust forward. Guochang subconsciously widened his eyes. Even from a distance, he could feel the dull pain of the wind piercing his face. Too fast to react. His instincts were faster than his reaction, but when he instinctively raised his pitchfork in an attempt to block, his blocking posture was instantly defeated by the surging spear tip. Huaishur moved forward, and Guochang retreated. The offensive and defensive positions reversed, but the distance between them continued to shrink inch by inch, leaving everyone in despair. This continued until Shijiang roared out in anger and opened his mouth to attack Huaishur again. But at that moment, the ground beneath Huaishur's feet suddenly cracked apart. Double acceleration, use step. It can be even faster. Guochang opened his mouth in astonishment, but he didn't let himself be slaughtered. Instead, he suddenly stuck his head out and bit at the tip of the spear that was close at hand. His teeth closed together like an iron clamp, and he actually bit down on the tip of the spear. The tip of the spear was sweet. For some reason, this sentence suddenly appeared in his mind. Then he saw Huaishur's mocking smile. You want to eat the blood of the blue-crowned dragon? Are you starving? In the blink of an eye, Guochang screamed and couldn't bite the tip of the spear. Wrinkles climbed up his face, and his body instantly bent down. In the blink of an eye, he had lost 20 years of youth. Then the tip of the spear pierced straight through and tore the corner of his mouth. Without waiting for him to dodge, the tip of the spear pushed forward like a shadow. Guochang roared and raised his pitchfork to block with all his might. His heart was shaken. Where did this little bastard come from? How could he be so fierce? A new member of the Astronomy Association? New member my ass. What kind of devil training camp did the Astronomy Association recruit new members in these past few years? In his heart, he was already cursing that crazy woman, Lin Yu, to the point of spitting out a torrent of abuse. How in the world did you provoke such a monster? With this skill, it would be believable if you said that he was a reserve member of the Astronomy Association's army, or rather, an archaeologist from the technical department. No matter how he looked at it, he didn't look like one. He was so young. Was he from the Continuation Institute's artificial cleanup team? No, they only worked in laboratories below 19 degrees. Or rather, primordial darkness, daybreak, deep space, cast iron. Which army did they come from? No matter which elite army it was, they were all F**king in trouble. Even a soldier king could stir up trouble in the city. You provoked a psychopath who killed people like drinking water. No matter how rich and powerful your Lin family is, aren't you afraid of being targeted by this kind of person? Then the axe chopped down, forcefully resisting the encirclement, and split open the head of the person blocking him. However, Shi Zhang's large mouth finally locked onto its target, and it opened its mouth to roar. The formless sound waves converged into one, whistling forward. Huaishur only had enough time to dodge the attack head-on before he was involuntarily swept up by the sound waves, and his vision darkened. The sound of a gunshot rang out, and a large hole appeared in Huaishur's originally broken left arm. After Shi Jiang finished unleashing his powerful attack, he still didn't dare to relax. He carefully pulled out a long cavalry blade from his bosom. This was the one he had obtained from Yamatai City this time. The cavalry blade, which had experienced many vicissitudes of life, was covered in notches and nicks. It was unknown how long it had accompanied its owner in wandering, but it was still brimming with killing intent. Obviously, it was a rare killing weapon. At this moment, the cavalry blade began to frantically extract Shi Zhang's origin substance and blood chi. It instantly flew out of its sheath, and amidst the Cossack dance music, it fervently slashed towards Huaishur. The military blade was swift and fierce. As if it was being controlled by a formless cavalry, it instantly chopped down 3 times, bringing with it a terrifying and unstoppable force, completely destroying Huaishur's defensive stance. Immediately afterwards, it chopped at his neck. Huaishur suddenly retreating into the thistles and thorns, instantly disappearing. Countless branches and leaves rustled, but no one could see where he was. He got away again. Guochang angrily stared, and then he reacted. It's that dark gold grade tool. Everyone, find it for me. He's definitely here. No need. Outside the dense forest, in front of the dark cauldron, Lin Yu sneered, pouring a shovelful of dirt mixed with Huaishi's blood into the cauldron. Immediately afterwards, a dark shadow suddenly rose from the medicine, swallowing the dirt mixed with blood. It turned around, knocking an arrow into the distance. The illusory arrow formed from pure curse power instantly disappeared. Then, it appeared in front of Huaishi's chest. With a snap, blood spurted out. Huaishi, who was hiding between the plants, was beaten out of his original form. He was only one step away from the river outside the dense forest. Just a little bit more. He lay powerlessly in the thistles and saw Guochang walking over step by step, pulling his leg, dragging him out of the dense forest, and throwing him on the open ground. He tried to gasp for breath. Seeing Lin Yu sneering at the side, he couldn't help but grin, revealing a helpless smile. "Oh, Annie, we meet again." He coughed out a pile of blood foam and kindly reminded her, "Your underwear is exposed." Lin Yu's expression twisted. Snap! A crisp breaking sound came from Huaishi's chest. An invisible force extracted the river water in the distance and rushed up into the sky, surging majestically above the dome of heaven. Dragon in the sky. In the whistling sound, the majestic water dragon burst forth with a long roar, turning into the traces of countless galloping horses, galloping toward the ground. In the torrent, the Pegasus that had turned into a dragon roared loudly, and a familiar face popped out, shouting loudly as if it was afraid that others couldn't hear it. "Pretty boy, I'm coming to save you. La 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 la. Brother, don't come over." Huaishi widened his eyes, and he was so angry that he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. "My heavenly justice was almost finished. Why did you come back?" In the end, he rolled his eyes helplessly, stretched out his hand, and smoothed out the heavenly justice that was ready to be cast. "Fine, let's see how you're going to send it." Chapter 252. "Pretty boy, I'm here to save you, la 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 la." Yuan Zhao howled as he charged forward with the water dragon that he had created with all of his origin substances. Immediately afterwards, the water dragon turned into a sieve under the barrage of gunfire. Water splashed everywhere, and its volume shrank by half. Yuan Zhao roared angrily. The water dragon on the ground opened its mouth and spat out a column of water like a high-pressure pump. Even though it wasn't very powerful, it was enough to scatter the crowd. Even the people who were invisible were exposed by this AoE attack. The water dragon that had shrunk by half transformed into a blurry giant horse. It was unclear whether it was a horse riding a horse or a centaur. It raised the pitchfork in its hand and stabbed the person at the very front to death. It smiled brightly at Huaishi through the crowd. It looked as if it was saying, "Are you touched that your big brother is here to save you?" Huaishi was speechless. All he could do was roll his eyes. "Be careful of your back." A wandering cavalry blade suddenly rose into the air, slashing towards Yuan Zhao's neck from a tricky angle. Yuan Zhao hurriedly used his trident to knock the blade away. His face paled as the trident swept across, shattering two of the horse's legs. The galloping centaur paused for a moment. Immediately afterwards, everyone's guns were pointed at Yuan Zhao's face. Huaishi sighed. Everything was over. "I'll just continue to rain justice down from the heavens." Immediately afterwards, he heard the youth roar angrily, "Scram!" Yuan Zhao howled. He raised his trident and slammed it down in front of him. Water rippled outwards. The Pegasus that had transformed into a dragon whinnied and turned into a curtain of water, barely blocking some of the bullets. However, even more bullets landed on his body. Even his face was torn apart by the bullets, causing blood to spurt everywhere. However, the Pegasus continued to gallop forward. Amidst the youth's angry roars, the trident swept outwards. The last of the water rippled outwards, creating a sharp blade that forcefully pushed the crowd aside. "I'm going to save you today." Yuan Zhao howled as he ran out of energy and advanced. Guo Chang waved his hand. A tall and sturdy guardian lifted up a large shield and slammed it into the ground. Just like that, the heavy tower shield pushed forward like a wall, crushing towards Yuan Zhao amidst the rumbling sounds. In the next moment, there was a loud explosion. Yuan Zhao took a step forward and turned around. The trident curved into a faint arc in the air. Following his stride and the push of his palm, it suddenly bounced off. The trident's blade lit up with a blazing radiance. The tip of the spear left his hand and flew out like a dragon. It pierced through the shield and smashed the head behind it like a watermelon before continuing to fly forward. Following the fluctuations of the river water, Huaishir felt that he was finally pulled to the shore by Yuan Zhao. After a long time of suffocation, he began to cough violently. With great difficulty, he finally gasped for breath and finally raised his head to ask the question that had been stuck in his heart for a long time. Where did you get so much equipment? I have a deep foundation. What do you know? Yuan Zhao grinned proudly. Under Huaishir's suspicious gaze, he finally shrugged helplessly and looked elsewhere. I felt that I might not be able to beat them, so I went to Ginza first and found Sister Yi to treat my leg. Then I borrowed a few pieces of equipment. But the main thing is still relying on my skills, you understand? When I used that spear, they were scared to death. All right, you're good. Huaishir sighed. If you have the ability to borrow equipment, why don't you borrow a few more good brothers to chop these bastards to death? This time he succeeded in being a hero and saving the pretty boy, so this brat will be very arrogant in the future. But since he had saved him, he shouldn't attack him and let him be proud for a while. Shaking his head, he climbed up and looked around. When he heard the footsteps coming from upstream, he suddenly frowned. We have to go. But Yuan Zhao didn't reply to him. Yuan Zhao sat on the ground, leaning against a tree, as if he wanted to hide his back. His face was pale. When Huaishir looked over, he squeezed out a nonchalant smile. Soon after, he couldn't hold it in any longer and spat out a mouthful of blood. His expression couldn't help but contort into a ball and cry out loud. It hurts. Blood mixed with the river, water slowly flowed down from his back and fell to the ground, dyeing the tree dark red. Huaishir was stunned. He reached out and forced Yuan Zhao's back to turn around, only to see several big holes so deep that bones could be seen. There were also broken internal organs and bones inside. Traces of dark shadows entangled inside, eroding his flesh and rotting his internal organs. Soon, flies drilled out of the eggshell and flew up from the mangled flesh, gunshot wounds, military knife slashes, and curses. Huaishir's expression turned ugly. He stared at Yuan Zhao's face that was dripping with snot. Why didn't you say so earlier? Cut the crap. I'm the big brother. Big brother, do you understand? While twitching, Yuan Zhao actually had the strength to roll his eyes and stare at him. Save a little brother. Just save a little brother. What's wrong with that? Huaishir was stunned for a moment and couldn't help but sigh. You're just calling me big brother. You can't be so stubborn, right? You've already called me big brother, and you still want to go back on your word? Yuan Zhao didn't know where he got the strength from, but he grabbed Su Chen's collar and angrily yelled, even if you're a little brother for a day, you're still a little brother. Do you understand? Huaishir picked up the axe again and picked up the equipment that Yuan Zhao had left behind. He lightly tapped them. A pair of light gold boots, a pair of bracelets that amplified strength, and an earring that could replenish a bit of origin substance. With the origin substance, the Mount and Ghost Sage insignia could be restored. If his vitality was extracted, his wounds would quickly heal, and he would be able to move again. So it wasn't too bad. At least he could still be sent away. There's no need, the Red Glove said. There's plenty of time in the future. You know, I actually didn't need him to save me. I could have handled it myself. I sent him away mostly because I felt that he would be in the way if he stayed. Huaisher looked down at the pool of blood and muttered to himself, but he really did come to save me. The red glove was silent for a moment, then suddenly said, "You're regretting it." "Yes, I'm regretting it." Huaisher sighed softly. If only I had used the flyer that kitten gave me earlier. Why would I owe him a favor? No, I should have been more cautious. I shouldn't have been so arrogant as to think that I could take on 2 border mercenary groups by myself. But what I regret the most is that before he came to save me, I never treated him as a friend. He laughed softly. I just wanted to use him. There's no need. The red glove said coldly, "This is just a game." "Who says it isn't?" Huaisher shrugged and gripped the axe in his hand, looking in the direction of the footsteps. "That's why I wanted to play a game with them." Chapter 253. 5 minutes later, in the forest, Shi Jiang lowered his head and lit the cigarette at the corner of his mouth. After taking a few deep breaths, he grabbed the subordinate beside him and pointed at the thing hanging on the tree. "What is this?" In the silence, the subordinate hesitated for a long time, not knowing what he was talking about. He tried to read the 2 blood-red words on the tree stump. "Gift." Shi Jiang flew into a rage. He kicked him into the tree, hanging him together with the blood-red gift. "Gift my ass." The veins on his forehead popped out. He angrily crushed the burning cigarette in his mouth. He turned around and roared at his panicked subordinates. "What is this called? This is called fucking disgrace." You 7 people went to catch a seriously injured little ghost, but in the end, not only did you not find him, you were even hung on a tree like this. If this isn't disgrace, then what is? In the silence, no one replied. Only the victim hanging from the tree released a difficult sound, blood slowly flowing out from his chest. Mosquitoes and flies flew up and landed, releasing an annoying buzzing sound. Shi Jiang was silent for a long time. He pulled out his gun, aimed at the tree, and pulled the trigger again and again. After the rumbling sound, the ravaged little Judge Jean finally fell to the ground. Old Lee suffered. When we go back and split the money, he will get an extra 10%, which will be deducted from your share. Does anyone have any objections? Shi Jiang asked. The subordinates quickly shook their heads. Very good. Shi Jiang nodded in satisfaction. Then he roared out, "What the fuck are you all standing there for? Go and find him for me. Find those 2 little bastards for me. This father will tear their bodies to 10,000 pieces. Otherwise, just wait for your bodies to be torn to 10,000 pieces by those 2. Under Shi Jiang's roar, the sound of giant trees collapsing in the distance continuously sounded. Flames rose. In the gradually rising smoke, the tyrannical scarlet red spread through the forest, burning everything to ashes. The angry crow screeched and circled in the air. There were jet blackbirds that continuously swooped down. Soon after, they quickly withered in the spreading smoke, withering, turning into shriveled corpses. In the thick smoke, the shadows of the snakes slowly condensed and became clearer. In the end, they entered the boiling abyss-fierce poison in the cauldron. It turned into a strange medicinal juice that looked like liquid darkness. This was no longer in the realm of refining medicine. It was almost like creating a new life, greedily harvesting all of the surrounding origin substances and raising the evil spirits in the womb. Almost there, almost there. As various precious materials were thrown into the cauldron, Lin Yu's smile became more and more joyful. Amidst his hoarse laughter, the tragic scar on his cheek, which had just closed up, burst open again. It was so hideous. Blood dripped down and sprinkled into the cauldron. Wisps of blood-colored smoke rose and drifted in the wind like tiny snakes. At the side, Zheng Sui could not help but take a few steps back to avoid the blood smoke that swept past the tip of her nose. He secretly complained that there were so many people in the team. Why did he have to be a bodyguard, a job with no future at all? However, when he looked at Lin Yu's back, a trace of fear appeared amidst his initial unhappiness and resistance. Brewing potions, throwing in calamity and death, producing destruction and despair, these female ascendants, known as witches, were intoxicated by the refinement of negative origin substances and the extraction of calamity. They were known for their terrifying poisons and curses. Although they were not recognized as alchemists, the destructive power they could cause was even more terrifying than alchemists. However, 9 out of 10 of them were insane, and one of them had already become a complete lunatic. Glancing at her, she would kill your entire family and your neighbor's family. Among the witches, she was already the type that was easy to talk to. After all, they had to use medicine as a medium to summon monsters from the depths of hell all year round. The essence of their souls was about to be assimilated by the abyss. Even if they looked as beautiful as flowers, they were essentially no different from man-eating flowers. Anyone with a slightly normal brain would not want to be targeted by a walking cherry bomb, right? Personally, serving a cherry bomb was even more unbearable. In the unbearable silence, he looked at the dense forest in the distance that constantly rumbled, hoping to hear some good news amidst the rising flames. For example, if those 2 guys finally caught something, he would be able to escape as soon as possible. But soon, the flustered and exasperated Shi Jiang walked out of the ashes with a face full of soot. He spat out a mouthful of black spittle, his face ashen. His heart sank. "I didn't find them." From afar, Shi Jiang shouted unhappily, "They've already run away. If you ask me, we are wasting time." He walked back. "Wait a minute." Zhen Sui subconsciously raised her gun and aimed at the approaching Shi Jiang. The 2 guards at the side also stood up and blocked in front of her. "Password? What kind of stupid password is this? Even I have to check it." Shi Jiang's expression became more and more unsightly. He cursed, but his footsteps continued to move forward. Zhen Sui pulled the trigger without any hesitation. The bullet hit Shi Jiang's foot as a warning. "Password." But Shi Jiang's movements did not stop. Instead, he sped up, madly rushing forward. He was still 15 meters away from them, but his speed was inconceivably fast. In the air, he was flying. Dozens of moving red lines suddenly flew over, piercing through. As he madly ran, Shi Jiang flew up, changing his posture in the air. He brushed past dozens of blood-colored smoke to dodge, but he was unable to dodge Zhen Sui's bullet. Following the roar of the gunshot, Shi Jiang's figure flickered. In the end, Huaishi's face appeared. "I've been waiting for you." As he laughed, a tall and sturdy figure suddenly appeared in the empty air. Guo Chan, who was hiding at the side, held a pitchfork in his hand. He had been accumulating power for a long time. After confirming that the person attacking was Huaishi, he suddenly attacked. The pitchfork stirred the wind, stabbing towards Huaishi's chest. It pierced through his chest. Under the extraction of Fang Liang's divine mark, a dense negative origin substance gathered on the pitchfork. Guo Chan could not help but let out a happy moan. But he quickly felt that something was wrong. His hand felt empty. It was as if he had pierced through a cloud of fog. Huaishi's face flickered again. In the end, it turned into the red glove's pale side profile. After being pierced through by the pitchfork, the red glove expressionlessly raised his hand, showing Guo Chan the dark gold vambrace on his wrist and the densely packed metal bombs in front of his chest. Oh no! Guo Chan subconsciously opened his eyes wide. He had originally planned for everything, even guarding against Huaishi's sudden attack. The only thing he had not expected was that Huaishi would actually tie this dark gold equipment to the bombs. In the next instant, Ramses' wrath burst forth. Flames soared into the sky. Following the roar of the explosion, A dark origin substance appeared from the ashes of the dense forest, like a viper lurking in the thorns. The mountain ghost opened its eyes and shot towards the enemy like lightning. This was Yu's step, which used up the last of its origin substance. It was as fast as lightning. Amidst the rumbling of the air being torn apart, Huaishur stepped forward, trampling on the cracked earth, stirring up flying ashes and dust as she swept past the astonished ascendant. In the next instant, a cut from the sacrificial blade appeared on his neck. Blood spurted out and was sucked into the hurricane, forming a scarlet trail. In the blink of an eye, he was already within reach. Instinctively, Zhan Sui took a step forward and stood in front of Lin Yu, perfectly fulfilling her duty in the instant of the attack. Immediately afterwards, she pulled the trigger, hoping that she could delay him for just a moment. However, Huaishur's speed did not decrease in the slightest. He did not dodge or evade, only moving forward, allowing a wound to appear in front of his chest. He raised his axe and slashed downwards. A handful of blood flew into the air and fell into the cauldron. Countless wisps of blood and fog madly pounced towards Huaishur. "Didn't you hear what the employer said?" Shi Jiang's expression was dark and ruthless. "I've fucking had enough, you know? I shouldn't have fucking believed a bastard like you. Still want to negotiate. Negotiate my ass. Since when have I ever negotiated with hostage takers?" Huaishur's expression didn't change. He only slightly twisted the hilt of his sword. In an instant, Lin Yu violently spasmed and twitched in pain. The sacrificial blade on her neck pressed down a bit. The blade greedily absorbed blood, making Lin Yu's face become even paler. Guochang reached out and blocked Shi Jiang. "Old Shi, don't go forward." "Then what about the thing you promised me?" Shi Jiang asked back. "So many of my brothers have died. What about the thing you promised me? If you don't give it to me, I'll take it myself." He pushed Guochang aside and pulled out his blade, walking towards Huaishur. Guochang turned around and saw the faint smile on Huaishur's face. The smile was calm and indifferent, as if he was looking at a joke that had nothing to do with him. He sighed and gave a look to his subordinate behind him. Then he pulled out his pitchfork and suddenly stabbed out. Shi Jiang's footsteps stopped. He turned around in shock and vomited blood. "You again. Sorry, old Shi." Guochang looked into his eyes. "I didn't have a choice." Just like when it stabbed him in the back, Shi Jiang cursed, spat out a mouthful of blood, and fell to the ground. As he fell to the ground, the backlash of the oath followed. In the air, the image of a Xieji appeared. It suddenly opened its mouth and sucked away a third of Guochang's life force and a third of his origin substance. It also removed a third of his sacred scar. It was permanent. Even after he left this game, it still wouldn't heal. But as he was dying, Shi Jiang wasn't willing to let this traitor who had betrayed him go. He used all of his strength to raise the military blade and send all of his blood into it, the light of Yazi's wrath, and the military blade rose into the air and slashed towards Guochang. At the same time, Guochang's subordinates, who had already received orders from Guochang, attacked Shi Jiang's subordinates. The two sides instantly became chaotic. Jin judges continuously fell to the ground. What a great show! In the chaotic battle, even the invisible dark gold equipment was cut to pieces by the pursuing military blade. However, under Guochang's counterattack, the military blade was also cut to pieces. He propped himself up with an iron fork, doing his best to gasp for breath. In the end, only 3 people were left standing. Guochang gave a signal, and the man called Mu and walked up. With a slash of his blade, he cleaned up the remaining opponents who were still breathing. The ground was a complete mess. Only 14 gold coins were thrown over by the judge. "You want sincerity?" Guochang stared at Huaishur's eyes. "Now let her go." Huaishur laughed and asked back, "You only have 3 people left. What are you going to use to talk to me? How about this? You kill the other 2, and then kill yourself. I'll let her go, a promise worth 1,000 gold. How about it? Then you'll chase after her, and kill her? Don't play this game with me." Guo Chang sneered. "I'll use this to talk to you. How about it?" He bent down and picked up a heavy package from the border relics that had fallen from Shi River. There was a countdown timer embedded on it, and it had the red and blue lines that the audience loved to see. It was clearly a package of alchemy explosives. The things that Shi Jiang prepared, one package is enough to send half of the park to the sky. Guo Chang said, let her go, otherwise we'll all die together." "Then how can I believe you?" Why Sure indifferently asked back. Muan, where the hell did you go?" Guo Chang roared, calling the stooped, middle-aged man over. The middle-aged man opened his palm, the last tattoo on his palm disappeared, and the shadow of a Xie appeared once again. "If you let her go, I'll throw the bomb away." Guo Chang gasped for breath, staring at Huai Shi's eyes. "When the time comes, we'll fight to the death. Otherwise, we'll all die together." "Good." Huai Shi nodded. The Xie's shadow looked around and then disappeared. The contract was established. Thus, Huai Shi snapped his fingers, and in an instant, the rope of sorrow was released. But before Lin Yu could do anything, his palm suddenly pulled on the hilt of the sword, tearing a huge wound. In the sudden scream, the sacrificial knife slashed across Lin Yu's wrist, nimbly picking out 2 insignificant fascia and cutting it. Finally, it pierced into her thigh. "Run, girl." Huai Shi let go, staring at the resentful face, slowly took a step back, and said with a smile, "Run, before I find you. Run as far as you can." "One day, Huai Shi, one day." Lin Yu looked at him deeply. A sickly malevolence appeared on her pale face. "I'll make you regret everything you've done today." "Is that so? That's a pity." Huai Shi shrugged helplessly. "I've already regretted what I've done not long ago, but unfortunately, the person I regret is not you." Lin Yu stopped talking, gritted her teeth, and endured the pain. The snake divine, Mark, froze the wound hastily and turned to leave. "You have to be faster." Huai Shi looked at her receding figure and reminded her loudly, "I'll come to find you soon. Remember to hide well." Lin Yu's speed increased, and she stumbled as she ran. Soon, she disappeared at the end of the street. In the dead silence, Huai Shi retracted his gaze from her, turned around, and looked at Guo Chang. "Now it's your turn." The knife and axe fell from his hands, colliding. Sparks burst forth, illuminating the ghost fire in his eyes. "Hurry up, gentlemen," he said. "I'm in a hurry." Huai Shi's eyes drooped, concealing the demonic light that was burning in his eyes. After death, he would naturally fall into eternal slumber. In that instant, the mountain ghost's cold light burst forth from the crack in his chest, and origin substance exploded. The ground beneath Guo Chang's feet suddenly cracked open. The chains that had been hidden in the ground shot out like snakes, coiling around his ankles and forcefully growing, binding him within an instant. The dark origin substance condensed into a tangible form of grief and rushed into his consciousness, transforming into a flood that drowned out all thoughts of resistance. At the same time, the shrinking chains forcefully suppressed Guo Chang's sage insignia, even if only for an instant. Huai Shi stepped forward. Emperor Yu's steps. The evil spirit pounced forward. Would grace. Guo Chang only remembered to roar. With all his might, he swung his arm through the chains, and at the last moment, he threw the bomb in his hand towards his teammates. From the very beginning, he had never planned on following the contract. It was as if Huai Shi had never trusted him. The contract said that he had to throw the bomb away, but it didn't say that others couldn't pick it up. It was just as if Huai Shi had said that he would let Lin Yu go, but he hadn't said that she could leave in one piece. After working together for so many years, Guo Chang's teammates were already aware of his plans and intentions. During their brief conversation, they quietly prepared themselves, completely focused on waiting for the signal. Even if they all died here, it didn't matter. This was just a game. From the very beginning, their goal wasn't to win the championship. As long as they could stall Huai Shi here and kill him, even if they had to die together, they would still be able to turn the tables. Just as Wood Grace was about to throw himself at the bomb and activate it, the other tall and sturdy Sublimata's body was already covered in blazing flames. He opened his arms and pounced towards Huai Shi, bringing with him a terrifying temperature. He passionately embraced him. As long as they could stop him for an instant, as long as they could slow him down even a little bit, their goal would be achieved. As such, the flames grew hotter and hotter, not hesitating to burn his own body. The Sublimata swelled in size once again, roaring as it transformed into a wall of flames that pressed down on Guo Chang. Immediately afterwards, he finally saw Huai Shi raise his head. And his eyes. They were as calm as an abyss, quietly reflecting the raging flames in front of him. However, the flames were unable to illuminate the darkness, as if they had been completely swallowed up. All that was left was nothingness. Within the nothingness, the sound of tearing thunder could be heard. The ground beneath Huai Shi's feet suddenly shook, and countless dust particles flew into the air as he moved forward. Chapter 256. Following a sizzling sound, a putrid smoke rose from the alleyway. It was like sulfuric acid had been poured onto her body. Her flesh and blood quickly rotted and transformed, but then it was forcefully closed by some kind of cruel force and restored to its original state. Only a tragic scar was left on her smooth thigh. The intense pain lingered, causing Lin Yu's face to twitch in pain. She couldn't help but raise her head, suppressing the painful groans in her throat. Her eyes, which were already filled with madness, were bloodshot. In the midst of the intense pain, a crack appeared on the medicine bottle in her hand. She had almost crushed it. After a long, long time, she slowly relaxed and leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. That damned family, that damned son of a bitch, and that damned bastard Yuan Zhao. She clenched her teeth and tore off the troublesome ring of discipline on her wrist. The uncontrollable hatred and resentment was already hard to control. A dark origin substance that even the creatures of the abyss couldn't compare to rose from her soul, dyeing the originally turbid color even darker. However, she was wild with joy. When she saw the flock of crows rising in the distance, she revealed a mocking sneer. She had escaped in the end. That son of a bitch couldn't kill her. This killing intent towards him and the hatred in her heart would only become resources for her to evolve into a snake after settling down. She would only become stronger. Once she got out of here, she would use all her strength to make that bastard pay the price. Not only did he steal her evolution materials during the Demon Chef tournament, but also the humiliation she experienced this time. She would pay him back 1,000 times over. She supported herself against the wall and staggered out of the alleyway, awkwardly moving forward. She was just a short distance away from safety. After escaping, she didn't hide nearby at all. Instead, she called for a taxi from Yamatai City and used the fastest method to escape half of the city. Unfortunately, the taxi could only go this far and wasn't willing to go any further. At the end of the street, a small fox was lying on the street lamp. Like an illusion, its petite body was translucent, lazily combing its fur. When it heard the sound, it raised its eyes and looked at the person who came. It was cold and indifferent. However, Lin Yu could not help but laugh. It was sharp and proud, and she could not wait to move forward. "Take me in," She raised the emblem of the Social Security Bureau in her hand and said loudly, "I am Lin Yu. Take me to see Yi Shui." Yeah, immediately. The little fox on the street lamp didn't move. She quietly stared at him. She didn't say anything and didn't refuse. Instead, she allowed him to move forward. She passed through the boundary and walked into the Ginza district that had already been turned into a fortress. Yi Shui regretfully shrugged her shoulders. "I originally thought that I could stall for some time. In the end, I left so quickly that I missed a good show." She lowered her head and continued to immerse herself in the plot of barbarian King Detective Conan, causing havoc in the winery. Very quickly, a low rumbling sound came from afar. Countless pitch-black birds covered the sky. Under the black clouds, a galloping white horse came to an abrupt stop in front of a high wall. On the horseback, Huaisher looked around. In the end, he looked at the seemingly familiar ascender on the wall. Very quickly, he remembered the woman who fought with him over the dark gold item in the elevator. His expression became enlightened. "Yi Shui? Yes, it's me." Yi Shui sized him up and nodded in praise. "I haven't seen you for a few days, and you've become like this, young man." Huaisher didn't reply. He only raised his hand and threw the trident and a package over. "These are Yuan Zhao's things. He told me to give them to you." Yi Shui hooked her finger, and those things flew up and landed next to the manga beside her. After looking down, she couldn't help but shake her head. That child's mouth is stubborn and awkward. He also likes to play the hero and go into a dead end. "I've troubled you these few days. He saved me." Huaisher raised his head and told her seriously. At the last moment, he turned the tide. Yi Shui slightly raised her eyebrows, as if she was surprised. Very quickly, she smiled with gratification. That little brat, he still made quite a good friend. She went that way. Yi Shui raised her finger and pointed, "Go out this way and head southwest. It's probably the area left by Shi. Her mother's family has some relations with Xinluo. She should be heading in the direction of the Seven Stars group, right?" She paused for a moment and then revealed a nasty, mocking smile. Unfortunately, she went too late. She rejoiced in his misfortune and sighed. 20 minutes ago, the people of the Seven Stars group had already been killed by Xiao Xian. How tragic! I say, do you have the confidence to defeat your senior sister? Huaisher was stunned for a moment. He was immediately stumped by this question and helplessly shook his head. "It's hard to say. Anyway, thank you." "You're welcome." Yi Shui waved goodbye. "Have a safe journey." "Okay." Huaisher turned his horse around and galloped in the direction of Shilu. Countless crows soared into the sky and turned into black clouds, guiding the white horse forward as if thousands of soldiers were surrounding and protecting it. What a pity! If only I met him at the border. Yi Shui quietly looked at his back. She couldn't help but rub her fingers together to suppress the unbearable itch in her heart. If she could meet such an outstanding opponent in another place, she would definitely be able to have a good fight, right? She regretfully sighed and immediately shouted at Huaisher, "Ah, right, remember to come over later when you have time. I have something to talk to you about." Huaisher didn't even turn his head back. She didn't know if he heard her or not. In the midst of galloping, the pitch-black hearse suddenly stepped on the brakes and came to a sudden stop on the side of the road. It almost threw off Lin Yu, who was cursing in the front passenger seat. "What's going on?" She angrily turned her head and glared at the driver. The street was clearly empty. There was no need to stop at all. "I told you I'm in a hurry." "I'm sorry, customer." The driver with sunglasses turned his head stiffly and said in a stiff tone, "We just received a notice from the General Administration. Unfortunately, we will temporarily suspend service to you. You have to get off." "Why?" Linyu was furious. I paid. We will compensate you 10 times the amount of money you spent. The driver of the hearse announced the notice from the general administration. Due to your public violence against a distinguished honorary citizen and the destruction of Ueno Park, one of the pride of Yamatai City, has caused an extremely bad impact. After a meeting and discussion, the municipal administration, Kitten Paradise, and the Monks Cultivation Society jointly issued an eviction order for you. The eviction order will take effect in 12 hours. From now on, all public services in Yamatai City will be suspended for you, including but not limited to taxis, meals, accommodation and supply stores, etc. No one in the empty car was listening anymore. Before he finished speaking, Linyu had already pushed open the door and staggered away. She gritted her teeth in anger and ran awkwardly on the street. Her nails had already pierced her palms in shame. This damn place. Even a bunch of mutants from the border who were destined to live under someone else's roof didn't know how to appreciate kindness. In the dead silence, there was suddenly the sharp cry of a crow. When she suddenly turned her head, she saw a black bird on the roof. Its scarlet eyes reflected her pale face. She didn't know when, but countless crow had already landed on the roof. Like countless audiences, they entered the seats on time and quietly watched with their heads lowered. Their eyes were violent and cruel. They were waiting for the big show to start. Iron hooves hit the ground, and the sound of drums sounded from afar. In the dead silence, she breathed heavily and staggered forward. She raised the silver bracelet on her wrist toward the huge oil painting hanging at the end of the hall. "I'm Linyu," she said. "Let me in." The graceful lady in the oil painting raised her eyes and glanced around. Soon, the red carpet under her feet rolled down from the oil painting and extended to Linyu's feet. Linyu stepped onto the red carpet and used the last of her strength to walk forward. Step by step, she disappeared into the painting. When the hall behind her disappeared, Linyu no longer had the strength to support her body. She knelt on the ground and gasped for breath. Sweat dripped from her face and fell on the red carpet like tears after a disaster. Linyu's expression twitched as if she was angry, but she couldn't help but smile. She laughed silently, full of malice and madness. She was safe. She was still alive. I'm a member of the Lin family. After a long rest, she finally got up from the ground and looked up at the man reading a book behind the table in the front hall. She was dissatisfied with his indifference and disregard, but she couldn't get angry because she was living under someone else's roof. There was no need to lower herself to the same level as these lowly people. She gathered her hair and said faintly, "Take me to see." Executively, the person reading the book didn't respond. He just looked down at the blank page in his hand, motionless as if he was frozen. There was a mysterious smile at the corner of his mouth. "Hey, did you hear that?" Linyu frowned and finally realized that something was wrong. She walked forward. "Take me to Sealy." Her voice stopped abruptly. She finally caught a glimpse of that drooping face. There was a thin red mark running across the entire face. It was as if it had been drawn by an extremely fine ballpoint pen. It was not noticeable at all. On the dull face, a frightened eye trembled and raised slightly. But as she stepped forward, the person reading the book suddenly trembled and split into pieces in front of Linyu. It was unknown whether it was the tremor of her footsteps or the breeze caused by her words. Countless bright red marks were cut open like flowers, revealing a cut that was as smooth as art. There was also a cross-section of the skin that was so smooth that it moved one's heart. Whether it was the internal organs, the bones, or even the brain and consciousness, they were all cleaved into two halves by the blade. Immediately after, they were frozen by a thin layer of frost and delicately glued together. But now, such a delicate connection was broken. It was like the first domino was pushed, triggering the collapse of the sequence. The collapse of death began, spreading inch by inch. Viscous scarlet spurted out from the broken leather bag, completely dyeing the entire table, and the wall behind it red. At the last moment before his death, the Ascendant let out a hoarse sigh. It was as if he was finally free, full of gratitude. Judge Jean fell to the ground. Lin Yu looked at all of this in a daze, frozen in place. After a long time, she took a step back and covered her face. Feeling the smell of blood on her face, her expression twitched. She opened her mouth, wanting to scream, but she forcefully covered her mouth. Subconsciously, she took a step back and rushed into the inner hall, wanting to escape from this terrible nightmare. But when she pushed open the door, she was shocked by everything in front of her eyes. The originally gorgeous lounge was now like a painting covered in layers of colors. Red, red, white, red, 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 and red. And there was a touch of ash that couldn't be ignored. Tragic blood and bones were violently thrown everywhere, and the terrifying traces left behind by the disappearance of life covered every inch of space. But what was even more terrifying was that death didn't come. On the ground, in the midst of the mess, there was a faint, whining sound that came from the broken remains that couldn't be seen in the past. Fine ashes fell on the broken bodies, like a drizzle of fine snow. Under the contrast of the bright red, it was very dazzling. It was the ashes of a soul that had been completely burned, the dregs extracted from despair and death, the essence and most sincere wishes left behind when life fades away. Wanna die. He had never wanted to die so badly before. Seeing Lin Yu come in, the broken bodies in the pool of blood wriggled with difficulty. Their broken eyes looked up, using all their strength to plead, as if they were expecting her pity. But Lin Yu didn't dare to move. She even forgot her fear and screams, forgot everything. She didn't know where she was. Her consciousness was empty. Her soul was frightened, hovering on the edge of collapse. She just blankly raised her head, staring at the end of the blood and ashes, at the slender figure lying on the sofa. Her posture was relaxed and stretched, peaceful and calm. Her eyes were closed, and her red lips were curved like a sweet smile. It was as if she had fallen asleep. However, in the dead silence, there was a terrifying wave of origin substance gathering towards her. From this tragic ground full of blood, in a trance, Lin Yu trembled and finally woke up from the endless nightmare. She couldn't help but want to cry. She knelt on the ground and trembled. What kind of monster was that? Subconsciously, she wanted to retreat. She trembled and collapsed on the ground. She crawled backward with her hands and feet, suppressing the urge to scream and go crazy. She used all her strength to escape to the world outside the door, escape from this sudden nightmare. When she woke up, she realized that she had already escaped from the oil painting. She knelt on the ground, trembling. She used all her strength to scream, roar, and crazily scratch the people standing in front of her. She didn't know where she was or who she was. She only hoped from the bottom of her heart that she could welcome destruction. Calm down. Calm down. A familiar middle-aged man grabbed her hand and said in Xinhua language, "Why are you here? Where are Jiang and the others? Why didn't they respond to the signal?" Dead. They're all dead. They're all... Lin Yu raised her head in a daze and looked at his face, as well as the 7 or 8 ascendants behind him. As if she had finally reacted, she grabbed his hand and said, "Save me. I'm a member of the Lin family. Jiang is my grandmother's student. I can give you money. You must save me. You must save me." "Miss Lin, please calm down." Li Chong frowned. Of course, he knew who Lin Yu was, but he didn't know what had happened, why she was here, and what was going on with Jiang and the others. Please tell me what happened. But then, thunder sounded from afar. Amidst the singing of countless pitch-black birds, Lin Yu screamed in despair. He's here. He's here. She grabbed Li Chang's hand tightly and said, Save me. I beg you. At that moment, a shattering sound burst out from behind everyone. The tightly shut door suddenly shook. Immediately, it shattered into pieces under the enormous force. Countless fragments flew out. Soon after, countless black-colored birds turned into a tide that surged into the hall. They flapped their wings and sprinkled down blood like black feathers. Under the intense light, iron hooves crushed the stairs as if they were flying. The white horse rode a mighty hurricane and rushed into the hall. It trampled an ascendant under its feet and crushed him into mud. It neighed. Thunder shook violently. It was just like what was said in the Holy Bible. The sky opened, and there was a white horse. The rider held a knife and a sword, and a crown was given to him. His eyes were like flames. He wore many crowns on his head, and there were names written on them. He was dressed in bloody clothes. He came out and won again and again. Thus, the burning mountain ghost raised his face and smiled at her. We meet again. He said, Are you all right? Despair descended here. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.